Origin stories, origin stories. Where did we come from? How did we get here? These are the stories that made us the heroes that we are today. Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and welcome back to Origin Stories. Today we've got the final episode of the first season of Origin Stories, and I'm really excited. Today we got a very special guest, as the silver-haired Bronze Age Babe Comics will be joining us to give us her origin story as we go through the 10 comics that shaped her as a comic reader and fans. So I won't take up too much time here. I just want to thank SHBAB for joining me on this, and I also want to thank you all for watching. And let me know in the comments below if you like origin stories. Then I'll start working on season 2 sometime next year. But for now, this is the season 1 finale with SHBAB. I hope you enjoy. So why don't we jump in? Really curious to see what your first book is.
Okay, so my comic book origin story starts almost 50 years ago. My family had a summer cottage up in northern Michigan, and I do not know how a pile of comic books came to us, but I know it came from a family friend. And there was a stack of them. And so when I was about 10, 11, around that age, I actually started to pick them up and read them. And if there's one book that started my love of comics, it is, I'll hold up the real cover, it is this one, The Brave and Bold, number, 82. And it's from 1969. Now, like I say, I wouldn't have picked it up in my hands until probably 70, 71, 72 maybe. So it'd been around a while. And I'm going to show you the real book. Here it is. Because do you like the tape?
Yeah, that's great.
Isn't that great? So let me tell you, Scott, why this book, I spent hours. The story is fantastic, but for me, what grabbed me was the art. And I will show you the page that turned me into a comic book fan from the jump. And it's page 3. And it's that panel right there. And that panel with the hand on his shoulder and him looking over his shoulder and seeing who that is and saying, you. And that whole thing, I can't tell you how long I poured over that as a kid. It's like, this is the coolest thing ever. And the art is, it is Neil Adams, and anyone who watches my channel knows that I like him. So I was just flabbergasted by how realistic it looked. And yet I knew I was reading a comic book, how dramatic it was, you know, the way that Adams was drawing comics in the late 60s. I thought everything was like that. You know what I mean? And, you know, the reveal of Orm, you know. I was so thrilled when the Aquaman movie came out, so I actually knew who Orm was, because I don't read current comics, so, you know, I was like, oh, great. But, so this is the book that I just poured over and over and over again. Like, look at that. I mean, that is just, I fell into this as a kid. I absolutely fell into it. And this book has never left me. You know, the thing I just, like, look at that face of Commissioner Gordon. Shoot it out, shoot it out. So this is the book. This is, if there's a desert island book, it is this one. And so when I got back into collecting in a more profound way about 10, 15 years ago, I was like, you know, I didn't have the cover. I had no idea what the cover of this thing was. So I went on the eBay and it's like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then in a few years later, you'll see behind me I have yet another copy of it. So it's a higher grade. I decided that the books that you see behind me, Scott, are primarily higher grade copies of books that meant something to me when I was a kid, and that turned me into the comic book fan that I am now. So this is the book that started it all.
That's great. You know, I haven't. I've read a lot of the earlier Brave and the Bold issues, but I haven't read all of that run. I do have 85 because I'm a huge Green Arrow fan with the new Green Arrow.
Yep.
And I feel like the run it's appreciated very much by us older fans, but I feel like it's really underappreciated because it's just not known, particularly that era where Neil Adams is doing the artwork.
Right.
A lot of the issues is just, it's just sort of really underrated and under the radar. People don't realize like how cool that is. You can like if you want to get back issues, the Neil Adams issues of Batman will cost you a fortune, but you can get the
Right.
old ones with Batman and Neil Adams for like nothing.
Yeah.
And you know.
Well, I think that's, you know, and I think Bob Haney, who wrote the scripts for The Brave and the Bold in that era too, is just so underrated, or, you know, kind of, again, another under the radar writer from the time. I think The Brave and Bold was the first Batman title that DC let Adams go to town, you know, because he was like, I think we can do something different with this character. We can make him more a creature of the night. We can, you know, so if not for Adams and The Brave and the Bold, not this particular issue because it's not his first, but you wouldn't have the Dark Knight that we all know now. You know, because Adams had a different idea, and they're like, all right, well, we'll let you try it, not on the real one, but on that, like that Brave and Bold thing. And so it's, and I agree with you. I love that run of Brave and Bold. So it's worth to get, you know, worth getting if you're a Neil Adams fan. Run, don't walk.
Yeah, and I'm interested. Like before we move on to the next one, I'm just it was thinking to myself, I wonder when kids see their first comics, how formative it is, which artists and which writers, which creators they're first introduced to. Because I had a sort of similar situation. The first book I read was Black Hawk by Dan Spiegel and Mark Evanier. The second one I read was Walt Simonson's Thor, where he was writing and drawing the artwork. And that was just like mind-blowing, right in the middle of his famous Surtur saga. It was like a mind-blowing thing to be introduced to the art form through someone who had such a command of it. And I wonder how different it is for if a kid picks up, you know, their first book is like Rob Liefeld or something, and, you know, not to crap on Rob Liefeld, but oh well. But, you know, just how different the experience is for people depending just on which creator they get, much less, you know, the characters or anything.
Absolutely, and it's interesting too. As I go through this list, you'll see how that first book and second one here informed the rest of my comic book reading and also collecting, because they're kind of, it's a little different. I do read everything, but when I get to later on, you'll see that I have a difference between what I read and what I like to read now versus what I was just spending a lot of money on collecting for a certain amount of time. So, you know, sometimes you can only notice those seminal moments in people and artists years later. It's like, oh my God, you know, no wonder I loved this medium. Look who was writing and drawing for it, you know?
Yeah. Well, let's see what your number two is.
All right, so number two, and this is a close number two. And again, anyone who watches my channel will not be surprised by this. This is Lois Lane, number 105. This was also in that pile. This came out in 1970. And again, I would have been reading it in 71 or 72. So it had been out a while. I loved the Death House honeymoon story. I really liked Lois Lane, but the thing that really caught my attention in this book was the introduction of the Rose and Thorn character. I read it over and over again. I looked at those panels over and over again. I don't know how to describe it, but when you're, when you're up at your summer cottage and it's raining and there's nothing to do and you've been told to go up to your room and just read. I was lucky that I had books like this because it was great to reread and just be at home with a book like this. And so, again, behind me, you see, I did get a higher grade. Let me see this up there. Here we go. I got a higher grade copy of this, and I recently had it slabbed because it is such an important book for me. And I think something's going on with this book now, because this is like that. To get a slabbed copy, this would be a couple $100 now. It didn't used to be that way.
No.
And I think, is it because Rose and Thorn is in the new Legion of Superheroes or something? But
I assume it has something to do with this speculation, but I've got a couple reactions because, you know, I don't have quite as long a run of Lois Lane as you do, but I've got, right now I have issues 48 and up, and I have most of the 30s and 40s as well.
Yeah.
And for me, the best era of Lois Lane starts in this issue. It's the first. It's when Robert Conagher takes over the series, and he doesn't last a long time but starting with this issue where you have the Rose of the Thorn and the backup stories, and Conagher's doing the main stories as well for a while. For me, these are the best issues of Lois Lane. I love it when they're going up against the 100. I know the writers specifically tried to move away from that, and I thought that was a mistake. I thought these issues where they had that ongoing thing with the 100 are the best issues of Lois Lane, period, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. No, it gave a nice through line, and so did the Rose and Thorn story. You know, I have to tell you, there was one other Lois Lane book in the pile that I dearly love, that is in my collection as well, and I've talked about it on my channel. But the thing that got me, like most people, I went in and out of collecting, you know, and one of the times I dropped back in collecting was actually, I had, you know, as an adult, I had reread this, and it's like, God, that Thorn story, how great, I wonder what happened. So I went back and I collected all of the Rose and Thorn. So that's how my Lois Lane collection, I came at it sideways. You know what I mean? I came at it from, well, let's find out with Rose and Thorn. And in the meantime, I loved the Lois Lane stories. And then later on, I dove back in on another period and started going Lois Lane, Silver Age, and back. But it was really Rose and Thorn that brought me into the Lois Lane character and the books. So I have a really soft spot for this book and for her origin story. This is a great origin story, don't you think?
Yeah.
For a character. And the other thing I love about it is, like, you know, two female characters were helming a comic book in one of the most popular comic books in DC's line at the time. So I didn't even, you know, I didn't realize at the time what a big deal it was.
Yeah. It's a great
run. It's like, holy cow.
It's really a great run. I love, my favorite is probably, I think it's 114. It's where the Lois Lane and the Rose and Thorn storylines cross over.
Yeah.
Got that romance cover from Dick Giordano where she's crying. Lois is crying because Superman's flying away to talk to Thorn instead of. Oh, it's such a great cover. Yeah. So I should do a whole video on Robert Conagher. I have very mixed feelings about him, and there's like a good Conagher and bad Conagher. I know he had some serious mental health issues, so I think that was actually true in reality. And so I hate almost everything he did on Wonder Woman, but I love a lot of things he did on other titles. But
yeah, I think he really nailed, if for no other reason, I share the same thing with you. Sometimes you read a Conagher story and it's like, oh Lord, you were having a bad day, weren't you? But then when you read the origins, like, I think the Rose Thorn origin story is one of the best comic book stories of that era you can find. You know, it's really solid, and it's repetitive, you know what I mean? But again, it's a comic book. It's made for 10-year-olds. So, you know, the language used in it to describe the character, the Wraith of Wrath, or you know what I mean? But it was good, solid writing, I thought, but like you say, sometimes it's kind of like, what? We could do a whole episode on the next issue, the Lois turns black for a day, but that's another video.
Yeah, whenever that comes up again, we'll move on here. But
we'll do that.
Whenever 106 comes up, I always tell people, yeah, but if you want to see something that's just as crazy in the same way, read issue 110, where she adopts the Native American papoose.
Also egregious.
It's just as bad as 106.
It is. I know. I know it.
Okay. Well, but another video. Let's move on to your number 3 book.
All right, number 3. This is in the same pile, and this is a Batman book, number 225. That also, I came to find out in later years, is a Neil Adams cover. Great. He did not do the story art though, but it didn't matter to me. And this is a crappy copy. This is my coverless original. And it's a great done-in-one little mystery. It's and I do. Oh, and you can see behind me again another high-grade raw copy of that book, because it means so much to me. But I read this over and over and over again. It just was compelling to me as a kid, and so those 3 books are really indicative of how I started into comics, which was, God, this is fun to read. I like looking at art. I like the stories. I like everything about these things. I like the ads. The letters to the editor are fun. You know what I mean? So, I really came at it from as a reader. So that's number 3. And again, very important book. So in that pile from the family friend, Sue, wherever you are, thank you for letting little Sarah have your old comics.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I can't speak for everyone, but for me, I can definitely relate to just that we had, for one summer only, access to like a house like that was off in the woods on a
Mm-hmm.
We went up there for a week, and I brought 3 long boxes of comics with me.
Oh my God.
I went a little overboard. And I didn't spend any time swimming or in the woods. I spent the whole time reading comics and then writing stories in my notebooks. And I'd stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning, just lying on the floor and just going through my boxes, like, what do I want to read now? And just sort of learning what it was that I liked, by reading all of these stories over and over, eventually figuring out, I don't really like that.
Yeah.
Or that series, but I like what they're doing over here. Yeah. All right, well, let's see what you have for your next book.
Okay, so next up, we're moving from reading to how I started as a collector. This is Superman number 261. Now, a little backstory. You remember back in the early and mid 70s, you could send away to places in the books. Send us a quarter, we'll send you a list. You send us $1, we'll send you some books. Because I loved Batman so much, wrote away to a place in Passaic, New Jersey or something, and I ordered 10 Batman books of this era. But what came in the mail instead were 10 Superman books. And I can't remember, I know this book in particular was in that pile, because how can you forget that cover? So I was a little disappointed. I was like, oh man, I wanted Batman. I was reading Superman comics at the time. I was buying them off the spinner racks, but it's like, no, I wasn't really that into going into his, the backlog. But I started reading these and I loved them. I thought they were great. They had moved to the TV station by then.
Whoops.
And,
sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry, I thought I had this on mute.
It's okay. So they had, it was great for me to read this, the 10 books in a row from that era. So I did kind of fall into, it's like you're in the club. You know what I mean? And I get to binge them is what I'm searching for. So This book is my favorite story of that whole batch. So that's why I wanted to talk about it, because it's this batch that started me as a collector of Superman books. Because when you've only got a buck or two to spend a month as a kid to send away for stuff, I started collecting these. And so I was buying the current ones on the rack. I eventually subscribed, you know what I mean? And so I got books with those subscriber creases in them. But that's how I started a Superman collection. And I will be honest, I didn't read as I continued to collect over the years, and I visited comic shops, which was scary for a little 16-year-old girl at the time, because the mid 70s were not, it's not like going into a comic book store today. And those conventions were creepy too. So I wasn't always reading the books, but I was collecting them. And I was just making an effort to get, to go back as far as I could. And when I got back into collecting, kind of my last big dive, it happened to coincide with adulthood, and I had a little more money. And eBay, so you don't have to go to, creepy stores, which I didn't know they weren't creepy anymore. I didn't know that.
Some of them are still creepy.
I've been to a couple. I could do it by mail. So I decided and I stopped reading my Superman books, like the subscription, I let that run out. By the time I was 16 or 17, the thrill had kind of worn off at that point. So I decided to collect Superman, his title, from 1959 to 1979, because I decided I wanted a 20-year span. Because that's what they say, a typical comic book collector will collect 10 years on either side when you start reading. And that's just smack dab in the middle for me. So that was my collecting goal, which was to get 20 years worth of this title. And, I look back on it and I spent 30 or 40 years making that happen. And it was fun. It was, there was I always had my, the collection, you know what I mean? And so time, interest, and money would play into when I would dive back into that hobby. So, and I have to say, being an old fart, and you may appreciate this too, it's like, I don't remember every story I read. So I pull them out today, and it's like, hey, brand new.
Yeah.
And the perspective as an adult reading these things now, particularly in the 70s, they weren't terribly offensive. It's just silly. And, the worst you could say was like, oh, geez. But mostly it's just fun,
Yeah. I mean, so I started collecting in 1984, but I'm just old enough in terms of being a collector to remember what that experience was like. Because I went to a comic book store in 85, but around that same time, I remember mailing away. And when you'd mail away, when I was doing it, at that point, they would ask you'd list what you wanted, and then you'd list second choices.
Exactly.
And they would never send you what you wanted. They would sometimes send you the second choices. But I remember sending away for whatever it was I wanted, and getting back like Daredevil #8, the first appearance of Stiltman. And I was like, that's not what I was looking for. No one's aspiring to get the first appearance of Stiltman. I was trying to get like Avengers 16 or something. But yeah, I remember sending away for things, and just you'd be like, oh, it's finally here.
Honestly, I would say, oh my God, yeah. And when the subscription, I subscribed to Superman, Batman, and the Justice League, and Detective Comics. And actually, in order to build the Superman collection, I sold or traded the Batman, Detective, and Justice League. So I had a bunch of them, but I was building this thing. So, And the interesting thing is, when I got back into comic collecting again for my big final run here, I've basically been building the in the last 10 years, I've been building the collection I always wanted when I was 13, and now I have the time and the money to do it, and yay, right? So, but I didn't go back and get any of those Batman or detective books that came in my subscription that I remember, because I must not have cared about them, because I was like, yeah, take them, so my collecting of those titles were always earlier, that in the earlier Bronze Age and into the Silver Age, the stuff I never saw, so that's how I approached it. All right, you ready for a next one?
Let's go. Let's do number 5.
Okay, all right. This covers a lot of ground for me. Neal Adams. So Neal Adams is a big focus of my collection. When I got back into collecting a few years ago, my partner worked for eBay at the time, and she was working in the comic book group. So I didn't get any deals on anything. But I did get to help her out by, well, sure, I'll buy from your seller to make sure it all works. You know what I mean? So I took that opportunity, and kind of it really sparked my, like, God, I love this stuff, and I have some money now. Let's go buy some of this stuff. And I really focused my collecting on Neal Adams covers and Neal Adams art, because when I finally realized that my origin story started with him, it's like, I want to keep going. So this is not only representative of a lot of my collection, meaning Neal Adams, but these treasury books, I remember them as a kid. I still have that original, the red cover Batman one. Mine's all folded up and gross, but I did get another nicer copy. But I have had a ball in the last few years getting these books, because they're, it's hard to explain to someone who didn't grow up with them. It's like, no, it was such a big, hairy deal when they came out, and $1 and $2, there's no way I could afford that. So I get to, now that I can pay more than $1 for them, I get to pay a lot more than $1. But the treasuries are a very treasured part of my collection and my collecting. I really love the format, and it's just been great fun. So, key book.
Yeah, the treasuries I find interesting. They were just before my time. They had just stopped making them out into comics, so I never saw any new. And as a collector, when I was trying to buy the old stuff, they used to drive me crazy, because I couldn't figure out how to store them. Because in the boxes,
I still don't.
What do I do? I'm like, right now, I just have like a pile of them.
Right.
Pile, because I don't know what to do with them even now. But for me, it was always kind of like, I found them irritating because I couldn't figure out where to put them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the same thing with digests. They're too small. They don't fit in the box. I was told when I started collecting comics, I could put them all in this box, and I can't fit these in this box, so this isn't working out.
My friend Rob, who has joined me on a couple of live dives, years ago, he came over, and I was like, hey, do you want to see my comic book collection? And this is just when I was starting to get into this final push, because of my partner's job. And so he's like, yeah, I'd love to, because we had talked about comics. But so I bring down this crappy old box, you know what I mean, with books stacked in them, on top of each other. And so he's like, you really ought to bag and board those. It's like, oh, okay. So it's also been fun for me to, just because you can bag them and board them and little tape and make them all neat and tidy. So I've been doing that for several years too, which is like kind of, a lot of the Superman collection that I have did come bagged and boarded. But So it's been, that's part of the fun of being a collector too, is to play with it.
Yeah.
And here's a tip on how to store your treasuries. I have mine upstairs in my storage facility and my shelving allows me to do this, in a bank, just a regular banker's box, and they stand up straight. Now I don't have a cover on it, but they do stand up straight and neat, and so they're not lying flat and getting squished. So that's how I do it so far. And if I ever have to move, I don't know what I'm going to do with them.
All right, I think we're up to book number 6.
Okay, and you're gonna love. This is in your wheelhouse. This is in your wheelhouse.
That is in my wheelhouse, yes.
Okay.
I don't think I have that issue either. But
Oh, listen, I again, this would have been 10 years ago or so. I don't remember exactly how I started falling for romance comics. I might have gotten a bunch in an eBay, lot or something, and I just thought they were so hysterical, like current, like 1970s. But then somehow I twigged to the fact that in the mid-60s, DC had a couple of running characters. The first one I twigged to was Bonnie Taylor, airline stewardess. And I love this book. I love this run. I think, I look at those, the John Romita covers, I think he did those. No one drew women the way he did. And on the cover and in the stories, and the stories aren't really, I have a whole series of 1970s comics talking about feminism and how offensive much of what they were talking about is. I don't find anything offensive about what they were doing in these things in the mid-60s. I really don't, other than the fact that Bonnie might be mentally ill. But that's a different story. But so my collection has romance comics as a pretty significant part of it. And it's into 2 sections. One is the Bonnie Taylor, and then there's a nurse in Young Love, which is Mary Robin RN. And so I have a complete run of Mary Robin. I have a complete run of Bonnie Taylor, even the issues where they lost the covers and they still had stories to do. So just because it's fun to collect, and these are hard to find, and can be kind of pricey. So it just was, this whole run is a fun part of collecting to me. Just being on the hunt for something is part of the thrill. And and then my other part of my romance comics are the 1970s women's lib related stories. The best ones, and by best I mean worst, are usually found in 1971 and 72. Because the guys at DC had absolutely no idea what to do or say about the women's movement. And so watching them spin is a hoot now. But so this great part of my collection, and I had a ball collecting these. I really did.
Yeah, as you know, romance is the focus of my collection these days, and Archie. But the Archie ones I'm missing are getting just as hard to find as the romance thing. Yeah. Part of the fun of it, one of several aspects of fun for me, is that with superhero stuff nowadays on eBay, you can get anything you want at any time, and it kind of removes the fun of funding for it. But there's lots and lots of romance, including some of these Bonnie Taylor ones, where you can't find it on eBay. You may once in a while find it on eBay, but if you went and looked for a specific issue right now, you might only find 1/3 of the issues in her series. They're not that easy to find.
The way I completed my Bonnie Taylor run, I found a guy, and you have to root around on eBay because in particular, people who are getting rid of romance comics kind of don't know what they have. And so they'll put them in just romance comics a lot, And so I literally found a guy, he was in London, and he was selling 2 issues, the one I needed and another one, or like 2 others. And I just sent him a direct message and said, the only one I'm really interested in is, X, would you be willing to sell, break that out of that lot? And I'm thinking I'll offer you, whatever reasonable rate. And he was like, yeah. Now, so I lucked out, but it is the hunting and searching and figuring stuff out about how to find these books, because it isn't as easy for someone who doesn't know anything to sell a romance book and get the most money for it as it is for a superhero book, I think.
Yeah, on eBay, they're split. They either don't know anything about romance at all, or they know too much about the romance comics, and so everything's like 4 times the price that it should be. Because
is that DTA collector guy?
That's exactly what I was thinking of. But there's 2.
I would never pay that. And the same book has been for sale for $56 or whatever for 5 years. It's like, at what point are you going to let it go, brother?
Yeah, he's got a couple things I want, but I'm not going to pay that much.
Yeah, I refuse. And he also says, or your best offer. So I would make an offer, and he's like, no. It's like, well, why are you? Fine.
I don't want to rant about specific eBay people, but I bet we've looked at the same issues too.
Oh, I'm sure we have.
Young Love 106. He has a really high grade 106 with the
nun.
Women's live with the woman in the car in the short pants.
Oh, that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really wanted a really nice one of that, because for me that's like a top Bronze Age romance book.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's kind of hard to get these romance comics in good grade, isn't it?
Very hard, yeah. So the other thing I just want to say, like the Bonnie Taylor. Now, for me, I grew up when I was a kid. My grandmother would take care of me after school. So I would go over there, and she had her soap operas. So I grew up as a little kid watching all these soap operas. So
you were primed.
Yeah, so that's part of the reason that I like the romance stuff, but it's one of the reasons I specifically am really drawn to stuff like Bonnie Taylor with the ongoing soap operas. Most of the romance are just these sort of interchangeable, particularly at DC, these formula short stories. That fun, but the ones that are really good for me are these, and the Bonnie Taylor, the art, like you said, I love the covers because she's a stewardess. I think that's what they call her at the time, airline hostess.
Whatever. Yeah, airline stewardess.
Yeah, and so she's traveling the globe. My favorite covers, there's one, I think it's maybe 127, where the Colosseum, she's in Rome, and
yes,
I love that cover. And then the one where she's like on the Scottish Highlands or something, she's coming up over the hill, and she's like, I've returned, and she doesn't see the guy's grave.
Exactly.
The hill. And they did this gray wash with the moody sky behind her.
Yep.
36. Oh, they're so good. But yeah, I haven't finished those. I've got about half of the Bonnie Taylor and about 2/3 of the Mary Robin. But I'm trying to finish them off.
Yep. It took me a few years to complete both of those babes, and it's just such a thrill when you do.
One from that time period I didn't realize was quite as old as these, that's turning out to be really hard to put together, is April O'Day. I don't know if you've got any of the April O'Day. She's in Girls Love Stories from 64, 65.
Oh, really?
She's a small town girl that goes to Hollywood to try and become an actress.
Okay. All right, are we ready to?
Yeah, I think we're up to number 7 now.
Yes. Okay, so the rest of what I'm going to show you falls into the category of my collection, which is called Late to the Party. So these are things that I didn't read back in the day. I was dimly aware of them, but I have collected them. So this is Swamp Thing. This is a reprint that I bought just on a whim for super, super cheap. This came out in '77, and they reran the Bernie Wrightson original Swamp Thing books. And I fell in love with the story. I fell in love with the art. I loved what they were doing with taking horror genre movies basically and playing with them. So it wasn't enough for me to just have this wonder, and this reprint series is really nice. They have a nice little essay in it. It's great. But it didn't stop me from going out and getting a bunch of the same exact books, Swamp Thing. So they're not in great shape. I do have a Swamp Thing #1 that is in the rattiest shape that I was willing to pay for, and I love every page of it because I can take it out of the bag and read it and be guilt-free. But Swamp Thing just really grabbed me a few years ago. And it is among, so the collection is Superman and Lois Lane and some of the Batmans from those era. And then I just have runs of other stuff. And Swamp Thing has been a big part of the collection, one I am never going to give away. So.
It's interesting. I'm not a fan of Swamp Thing. When I started getting into comics was right when Alan Moore was starting his Swamp Thing run. So
right,
very early on, like some of his famous, stories, like the one with where he gives his girlfriend the flower petal and whatever. Anyway, if you're familiar with that storyline, I read that when it came out as a kid, and so these issues that people laud as just like these all-time classics, they just didn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
And then around that time, I also was given about 1,000 Bronze Age issues from the mid-'70s, including there was a Swamp Thing #1 and several issues of Swamp Thing from the original series, and I read them, and I just didn't get it.
Yeah.
I've never gotten the swamp monster thing, like Man Thing. I don't get it. The Heap. I have copies of these comics and I've read them.
Yeah.
I just don't understand it. So, but that's the fun is,
well, it sent me down a rabbit hole of like, oh my God, I love this Swamp Thing. And then I, bought a bunch of them from the 70s, after Wrightson stopped doing it. It's like, God, these grew pretty dull. And then I did check out the Alan Moore stuff, and I just found it so ponderous. You know what I mean? I was just like, this is not, my Swamp Thing is 10 issues, and it's very compact. You know what I mean? And it's pretty much one and done. And there's a message as much as the 70s were going to give you messages about, ecology and science gone amok and stuff like that. But yeah, it's so funny because, so many people are like, oh, you have to read blah, blah, blah. And I do it and I'm like, I don't get it. Don't get it.
Yeah.
I'm going back to 1968. Screw it.
Yeah, I have the same experience sometimes. But yeah, Swamp Monsters, I just don't get the appeal. I just don't, I've tried. I don't dislike them quite as much as personal bugaboo is baby versions of adult characters. I absolutely I hate. Everyone keeps
saying that,
Little Archie is supposed to be one of the best Archie series of all time. It's supposed to be really excellent. I just can't get into it because I hate the concept so much.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like that with the Swamp Monsters. I'm just like, I don't know. I don't understand.
Got it. Well, how about, let's see if another aspect of my late to the party is more amenable. House of Mystery. I actually got a treasury. I should have pulled the treasury. I got a treasury edition of House of Mystery. And I mean, I remember them when they were on the spinner racks when I was a kid, but I didn't pick them up because I wasn't reading ghost stories at the time. But I reread that treasury and I'm like, God, this stuff is good. And this also falls into I was going to get them anyway eventually because it's Neil Adams covers when they switched over in the late 60s from a different, kind of book. And then they switched to kind of kid ghost stories books. And getting a bunch at once, getting all the Adams covers is what I was after. And, but reading them, kind of binging them, there's such a personality to the book at this time. From the kind of recurring gallery of artists and writers, the editors had the greatest letter to the editor page of any DC book. It was like they had their own clubhouse, you know what I mean? And you were in the club if you were reading House of Mysteries because it was a snarky letter to the editor page. They had page 13 with those Sergio, what's his names, cartoons with visual puns. I mean, it was just these are fantastic books. And I always said, like, if you had a tree house, if you were a kid with a tree house and a gang of kids, you stocked your tree house with this book and these issues because they're just great. So this is a really important part of my collection to me, not only House of Mystery, but also several of the DC mystery anthology type of books like The Unexpected and some of those things. I really enjoy them, and they're easier and cheaper to get than some other stuff that's in my collection too. So House of Mystery.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't like horror in general. I don't like horror movies. I don't like reading horror.
Yeah.
Books are just tremendous. The art, the artists doing those covers, not just Neil Adams, but Bernie Wrightson and Mike Luda, like the art is just tremendous. Nick Cardy did a bunch of like fantastic horror covers.
Yep.
It's just like I think in one of my videos I have a small section of the horror books that I picked up Bronze Age, and I don't really read them that much. I know the stories are good because I have read them in the past.
Yeah.
And the interior art's fantastic. There's a lot of like Filipino artists that bring in, and they're like Alex Nino and different people just doing tremendous work in those books. But the covers, like, they're worth owning if just to look at the covers. They're
exactly. Yeah. Big.
Yeah. I think I mentioned at one point in one of my videos, at one point I was putting together like a whole run of Unexpected just because I liked the logo so much. It's just such a great logo. And then eventually I realized that was a little bit crazy, so I got rid of most of them. You know, they're just fantastic. They're just fantastic.
I have a mini run of Unexpected when they were the 25 cents. You know,
those are the ones. The 25-cent DC era is my favorite. Those are my favorite books in comics. The design of the covers, the logos, the 25-cent thing, just the whole thing. To me, that's the best in comics history. I just love the 25-cent DC books.
Yeah, yeah. You got a lot of bang for your buck, Ben. All right, you ready for number 9?
I'm ready for, let's see number 9.
All right. This is another of my late to the party. I spent a lot of time last year building a collection of the Doom Patrol. I came across a mention of the Doom Patrol in a book I was reading about female superheroes. And they were talking about Elastigirl. And that wasn't a very big chapter in the book. And I was like, wait, I guess I sort of remember a comic book about Doom Patrol, but I don't know, I didn't buy it. I got a big wad of nothing. But when they described this character, I was like, well, I got to go check that out. And holy smokes, I just absolutely adore it. This is the most feminist comic book I think you would ever read. And it came out in 66, 67. It doesn't hit you over the head with it. The interplay between the team members and their wheelchair bound boss, gee, where have we heard that before? Is just, this was so ahead of its time. And just, so again, I bought a bunch, and I want to go back, and, I bought a trade paperback compendium of like the first however many, you know what I mean? Just to read the stories and say, do I like this? Because, and I did. And so I'm thinking about, collecting those floppies, so to speak, as well. But these are fantastic, and it's been really fun to collect these and to dive into the Doom Patrol. So.
Yeah, Doom Patrol is another one where okay, so I've got a couple things I want to say about Doom Patrol. I love the pick. When I started into comics, I remember at a very early, like, I hadn't only been reading about a year, but I got a couple books about comics and like about collecting comics and stuff. Yeah. And there was a thing about Doom Patrol 121 where the team gets killed.
Oh, that's an amazing book.
And it was, this was in the 80s. The Doom Patrol, they were still dead. Like so I was just like, it was like this almost legendary storyline for me. This whole series, not just characters, but a whole comic book series that ended because the characters all got killed. And so it's just in my imagination, not even ever seeing any issues of the Doom Patrol. It had this place in my imagination. So when they relaunched the Doom Patrol post-Crisis, of course, I went out and bought it, and I was just like, that's a letdown.
What is this?
And then, of course, so like, the TV show now, and everyone talks about the Grant Morrison issues because they're so influential and whatever. But for old school people, the original Doom Patrol still has like this special place. And I have a few issues, but everyone that talks about Doom Patrol that was reading at the time, in particular, when you read it in the context of the other things that DC was putting out, so different and so revolutionary and so much ahead of everything else they were producing. And ahead of what Marvel was producing, if you believe Arnold Drake, who was convinced that Marvel stole X-Men from the Doom Patrol.
It would seem so.
Yeah,
I would have thought so if I was him.
It's just
it is such a worthy title. And I just was catching up on, I'm really slow about contemporary comic news. And I just caught up today, a video someone did on YouTube about the future of DC and like the corporate shakeups and all that going on. And so basically individual comic books are probably going the way of the dodo bird, and they'll publish graphic novels and they'll work on TV shows and movies. And so I'm thinking, God, it's so sad. Because, I still would think people would want to pick up a comic book every now and then, although maybe not. But anyway, for people looking for good comic book stories of any age, I pick up the Doom Patrol. You will be surprised at how modern it is. Yes, it came out in '65 or whenever, or that's when they started. You won't be at sea with these things. You'll feel it feels very contemporary, at least to me. So just a great series, and one I'm just so happy to have in the collection. I'm so glad I found it.
All right, we up to book 10 already?
Oh, we are at book 10.
All right, let's find out.
And book 10 this is the part of the collection which is I'm getting slabs. So this covers a lot of ground. It's a Lois Lane, and it's Lois Lane in a wedding dress, which is another subset of my collection. And just so you know, I also collect Lois Lane in her bondage covers. And so I have those slabbed as well. This is not the first slab I got. I think it's slab number 2. My Wi-Fi hotspot, when she started at eBay, the first Christmas, I opened up a box and there was a slabbed Batman Neil Adams cover book. And I was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing ever. So when when Laura and I got married back in 2015, she got me this as a wedding present. So from one of the eBay sellers, she bought it. She didn't get it for free. But it really, I know a lot of people are like, slabs, why? But I'll tell you, this collector, I don't have a comic book room. I have a comic book corner in my office. And so I do like the way these look. And I have slabs of books and a Wonder Woman run that really mean a lot to me personally. I really like them. So there are only a few, but it's been a really nice addition to my collection. I'm really glad it kind of rounds it out. So it's purely aesthetic, but I dig them. So, and if I tilt the screen up here, you'll see there's one of the Wonder Womans right there. But up top, it's the Bronze Age Wonder Woman run that I got recently. and it's the Nubia introduction in there is a favorite 3-issue arc of any comic book. Wonder Woman, I gotta say, you would think I'd love her, and I like some of it, but boy, the character just bounces around and around and around and bounces, and what are they doing with her? And I just, I was too busy reading Lois Lane and Superman and Batman when I was a kid. And so as an adult coming back into Wonder Woman, the only era I really connect with is that Bronze Age run. But so anyway, there you go. That is, in a nutshell, SHBABs collection and how she got here.
I love it. I love it. Of course, as you know, I collect the Lois Lane stuff. The slabbing's always interesting. I try to avoid arguments with people about CGC slabbing because I'm on different forums and people can get very up in arms about the concept of a book encapsulated in plastic where you can't read it. And I understand that viewpoint, but the other part of me is like, they did print 400,000 copies.
Exactly.
It's okay if one of them's in plastic. We've got a second one right here we can read. Yeah.
Well, I tell you, all the books that I have in slabbed, I've got readers of every single one of them. You know what I mean? I don't just, the way I collect them is like, no, the books that are slabbed, it's not just because it's slabbed in a 9.6. It's like, no, I like the book, either the artist or the story or whatever. There's a reason that it's encased in plastic and sits on my wall. Like everyone else collecting, it's like, they're very personal reasons. But for me, I think it always connects back to that 11, 12-year-old, and it was such an innocent time and such a fun time. And so it's been great to dive back in and out of this hobby, but particularly rewarding now when there's some money to be able to, I can spend some money and get the stuff I've always wanted. And part of my other reason for getting some of this stuff slabbed, I tell myself it's because my heirs will have an easier time selling them.
I think that's true. I mean, that's actually how, I've only personally slabbed 3 of my books. Although I've bought other slab books, and it was for insurance purposes. I have an insurance policy just for my comic collection.
Wow, good for you.
It's a lot easier to tell people the insurance company. If I have to make a claim, I can be like, it's a CGC 3.0, as opposed to me being like, yeah, it was definitely a 3.0. You can trust me.
Right.
I've gotten a couple books slabbed for that reason. And I think it's perfectly acceptable. Everyone has their own ways of collecting. And that's part of the fun of doing these videos, actually, is seeing everyone's different styles. And seeing, how their tastes have changed, their collecting habits have changed. So, yeah, I think it's great. So,
it's a wonderful hobby, and it's a great community. I am so glad I started doing some of these videos on YouTube, because I've met some great people, and I've gotten a chance to do some of these things with people like yourself. So thank you again for having me, Scott. I really appreciate it, because as any comic book collector knows, what do we love to talk most about? Our collections.
Origins, it's where we come from, it's where we've been. Everyone's got one origin story.